Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's HFTP webinar. I'm Brittany Brewster, along with Barbara Semeraro, and we will be hosting today's show. So today is U.S. legislative updates. Today's session will address AAHOA's initiatives on the U.S. federal, state, and local government levels to ensure the sustainability of hotels and the broader American travel industry by supporting initiatives at all government levels. And it will cover policy recommendations that address the industry's labor shortage and SBA, Small Business Administration, loan limits. In addition, we will discuss how AAHOA works with states on STRs, short-term rentals, OTA, online travel agency, evictions, and human trafficking awareness training and prevention. Laura Lee Blake serves as the president and CEO of AAHOA, the foremost resource and advocate of America's hotel owners. A highly accomplished attorney with more than 25 years of experience, Blake most recently served as a partner at Connor Fletcher. Blake brings decades of experience in the fields of law, government, business, and academia to AAHOA. Blake previously worked for AAHOA for nearly 10 years, from 2005 to 2014, as general counsel and vice president of fair franchising and government affairs. As president and CEO, Blake is focused on promoting fair franchising and franchise advocacy, evaluating the franchisor-franchisee relationship in an effort to improve the ROI, and helping to educate members about the legal aspects of their franchise agreements. Blake also is prioritizing strategies for legislative advocacy and building alliances with those who support the travel industry. Blake's passion is to serve women and children in poverty-stricken areas in the world and has traveled to several third world countries to raise awareness and make an impact. Blake earned her Bachelor of Arts in Communication and Media Studies with highest distinction from the University of Iowa and her JD Law degree with high distinction from the University of Iowa College of Law. And with that, welcome Laura Lee, and I now hand over the webinar to you.
Well, thank you so much. What an honor to be here this afternoon to present the AAHOA legislative update. And I'm very pleased that I have two of my colleagues here with me this afternoon. We have Emily Martin, who is our policy director in our Washington, D.C. office, and Rachel Stone, who is our director of state government affairs for the Western Division of the United States. So they will be joining me in presenting this webinar. But before we start, let me just ask you all a quick question. Have you ever heard of AAHOA? And so please go to the answer, the response box, and give us a quick answer if you have heard of AAHOA or if you have not. And we will then let everyone know what the results are.
Pretty even.
Okay, it sounds like it's pretty even. So yes, there we go. Thank you for your responses. Going to the next slide, I think you'll be quite surprised, even for those of you who have maybe heard of AAHOA, of the numbers. More than 60% of all US hotels are owned by AAHOA members. 34,260 AAHOA member-owned hotels in the United States. And this equals 3.1 million number of guest rooms in these AAHOA member-owned hotels. Now, going to the next line, I love these fun facts. 3.5 million guests stay at member-owned hotels each night. And yeah, the prior slide, thank you. Mm-hmm. There you go. And you'll see at the bottom, 3.5 million guests. This would fill all 30 NFL stadiums and all 31 MLB stadiums combined. That's how many guests are staying in these member hotels. Then 1.1 million employees work at the member-owned hotels, earning $47 billion annually. And again, a fun fact, as many employees work at AAHOA member-owned hotels as at FedEx and Home Depot combined. So, I mean, you can imagine all these employees. And then finally, AAHOA hotels support $96.8 billion in federal, state, and local taxes. So the scope of AAHOA is quite extensive, and we are continuing to focus on using that opportunity to be a voice for our members at all different levels, at the federal level, the state level, and the local level. So with that, let's move to some of the advocacy updates with the next slide. And then we'll show you a few photos with the next slide. This past year, it was a big year with big wins, and we'll be covering some of these. But of course, as Brittany was just mentioning, I rejoined AAHOA back in May of last year, just finished my 1-year anniversary. So what excitement and what joy to be back and really see how AAHOA is moving forward and making a difference. So let's go first to some of the local bills, because I think you'll find these quite interesting. You may have even read about a few of these in the news. But before we jump in, I'm going to ask you a couple questions. Do you approve of the city of LA giving homeless residents government vouchers to stay in LA hotels? Give us your thoughts on that. So again, think about that. The city of LA wanted to give out government vouchers to the unhoused residents in LA to stay in any hotel in the city. What are your thoughts on that? Do you approve of that? Do you think that that makes sense, or do you think that that's a bad idea? If you could vote, and then we'll tally up kind of where everybody stands on this. This is a serious issue that has arisen in the city of LA. And do we have any responses on that?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
43% of individuals say no, 21% say yes, and 36% are unsure.
Okay, very good. And I'll get back to that in just a minute. The next question. Do you approve the city, do you believe that raising the minimum wage to $25 per hour and this would be for hotel workers, is a good idea? So think about that. Right now in LA, I believe the minimum wage is $16 an hour. Do you believe that raising it to $25 per hour is a good idea?
It's pretty tied right now. We're looking at 43% yes, 53% no, and about 1% said they're not really sure.
Okay, very good. Final question. If you knew that raising the minimum wage to $25 an hour would cause more than 10% of local businesses to shut down, would you still be in favor of it? So think about that. If $25 an hour means that it has such a financial negative impact on the business that more than 10% would have to shut down, would that change your mind? Would you still be in favor of it?
We have a few people changing their minds. We have 35% said yes, and the rest said no.
Okay, thank you for those responses. That's actually very helpful. So let's go to the next slide, and I'll give you a quick overview of what has been happening in the city of LA. And I'll share with you too that the reason that this becomes so important is, as we know, if things pass in the city of LA, we typically then see similar types of ordinances and bills passing to other major cities in California, and then usually starting to move up the West Coast. We see a lot happening then in Oregon area, as well as then it starts moving across the country. Chicago is a typical city that will watch what LA is doing and maybe copy it, as well as New York. So this is not just focused on LA. But a number of months ago, Unite 11, which is a union in the LA area covering hospitality workers, presented a petition where they have received enough signatures on the petition. And what this ordinance would require is that every hotel in the city would have to report at 2 p.m. every day the number of vacant rooms that they had in their hotel. Now, 2 p.m. is probably the worst time of day to report the number of vacant rooms, because at 2 p.m. you still have guests checking in, you have changes, maybe even, walk-ins, that type of thing. But every single hotel would be required to report the number of vacant rooms. The idea was that the city then would issue vouchers to the unhoused residents that they could go stay in these hotels. Now, AAHOA, we oppose this, and we opposed it strongly, and I'll explain why. Because the concern was, as we know, that unfortunately a lot of people that are living on the street, some are facing physical disabilities, some have mental disabilities, some are suffering from some major addictions to alcohol, drugs, etc. And so our members have great compassion, of course, for anyone that has lost their job or is living on the street or is, under those extreme conditions. But to then have them come and stay in the hotel room without any wraparound services, and that was the kind of the key term we were using. And what I mean by that is someone, a social worker, a caregiver that could help determine, did they need food? Did they need medical care? Did they need mental health, services? Did they need rehab services? Just to allow people coming in with no wraparound services to then stay in these hotel rooms, it really puts the burden on the hotel owners and the housekeepers who are not equipped to deal with some of these major issues. And it's unfair then to the person with the voucher, as well as the families staying in the rooms next door. We were very concerned too what this would do to the hotel industry, because if a family is coming in from out of state thinking, oh, we're going to take this amazing family vacation to LA and experience all LA has to offer, and then they discover that in the hotels, there might be people suffering from all kinds of different issues, that maybe they decide to not stay in LA. Maybe they decide to stay elsewhere. So on the morning of the hearing, our members rallied in force. We had so many members show up at the hearing that they could not even fit in the hearing room at the LA City Council. And the LA City Council had two choices. They could have either voted that bill into law, or that ordinance into law that day, and it would have become law immediately, or they could have passed it to the voters. And that's what they did. They decided that the LA city residents should make this decision because of the impact it could have on the hotels, on the tourism industry, and on the city itself. So this now will be heard by the LA city residents next year in 2024. So this issue is not dead by any stretch of the imagination. It is still an important proposal that we are considering, that we are forming coalitions just to get the word out that without the wraparound services, this cannot be the answer. The city of LA cannot be trying to hide its homelessness crisis by tucking unhoused residents into hotel rooms with no services to help them or to support them. Then second, and this actually just came up about a month or so ago, we actually were hosting what we call a HOACon. And this is our annual, very large convention. It brings in, this year, it was close to 8,000 attendees, with members coming in from around the country. We had a sold out trade show floor. And this year we hosted it, of all places, in Los Angeles. Despite all the struggles we've been having with the LA City Council, here our HOACon was scheduled for Los Angeles in April. And it was at the LA Coliseum and the convention center there. And we just had a spectacular event. It was very well attended, very well received. But in the midst of that, again, this same union organizing group, suddenly they were hosting a hearing in front of the LA City Council, and it was on to increase the hotel workers, it was hotel and airport workers, to increase their minimum wage to $25. And our AAHOA members again showed up in force. And I will actually turn this over to my colleague, Rachel, because she participated in this event. We hosted at the last minute. We got buses organized to go over to the LA City Council to address this. But Rachel, do you want to step in and kind of describe what happened at that hearing?
Yes, of course. As Laura Lee stated, during a HOACon, LA City Council created this motion or passed this motion to raise the minimum wage in Los Angeles to $25 an hour. And it was one of those things where this was actually my first week at AAHOA, and it was one of those things where you have 1, maybe 2 days to rally up the troops, and we organized the buses, we drafted scripts for everyone, made sure everyone had scripts, we collected the data, made sure we had printed copies, attended the hearing, signed up, we were the first ones there. And we signed in on the kiosk to testify in general session and in public comment. And we didn't all have the opportunity to testify, but it was one of those moments where you see there is power in numbers and advocacy. And as a result of that hearing, they had another hearing last week, which I'll speak to. And Unite Here was there. And I will tell you that AAHOA members, again, came out, so much so they were standing outside the doors, and even the sponsor of the city ordinance, the policy director, asked Unite Here, Local 11, who's behind this ordinance, if the hotel owners could, if they could, step outside because we were so heavy in numbers. But as a result of Wednesday's hearing, this is Wednesday, May 17th, the LA City Council, with the help of a lot of our AAHOA members and meeting with city council members, they voted, well, one council member in particular filed a motion to wait for an economic study before we make such a huge decision. And this was a champion for hotel owners and the tourism industry, the hospitality industry. So now we are awaiting the results of an unbiased third-party economic study to just kind of see, okay, what is the ordinance's impact, especially on limited service hotels. So these are these smaller hotels. And then the ripple effect on other industries, different hotels in other regions. So that is what we're waiting for. And as Laura Lee mentioned earlier, if something passes or ordinance passes in Los Angeles, it sets a precedence for other cities. There are other cities in California like Anaheim, West Hollywood, or Long Beach, who are also looking at similar ordinances. So this is having a ripple effect and replicating other major metro California cities.
Yes, thank you, Rachel. Excellent overview. And on that point too, the reason we were so involved in this is because on the one hand, we absolutely understand for workers in the city of Los Angeles, the cost of living is very high. And our members feel very, they care deeply about their workers, and many of them view them as family members and are paying them the most that they can afford to pay. But we did hear from a number of our members that if the minimum wage went to $25 an hour, it would severely impact their hotels. They're not full service, so they do not have any revenues coming from things like valet parking or spas or full service restaurants. Their only income comes from the guest room rate. So in order to cover a $25 minimum wage salary or minimum wage, they would have to raise the guest room rates. And they were concerned that they really cater to those families who cannot afford the $300, $400, $500 room nights at some of these bigger hotels, and wanted to do that. And if this passed and they were subjected to this, unfortunately, they would have to raise their guest room rates, which could just have a ripple effect or cause a shutdown even of the hotel if their normal guests could not afford it. So it did have, you know, a strong response from our members. And it'll be interesting to see this economic impact study and what that looks like. And if we can get a carve out for the limited service hotels. So that is really the goal here. And if you could then go to the next slide. So as a result of all of these efforts, AAHOA has actually been in the news quite a bit. Everything from, you can kind of see in the bottom left of the screen, I was actually on CNN Live. This was day 100 of just starting with AAHOA, but this issue of the voucher program for the unhoused residents of LA, for them to be staying in hotels, got such national coverage that we were being approached by Fox Business News, Wall Street Journal, you know, a number of industry publications, as well as NPR and others. So it has captured kind of the attention of the world as to how is LA going to handle this homelessness crisis, and our hotel's a part of that. So, you know, stay tuned, because the voters will be deciding that next. So let's now go to the next slide. And this is with the federal updates. And I would like to kind of officially introduce Emily Martin, who is our policy director out at the Washington, D.C. office. As you can see from the slide, Emily has received her economics degree from the University of South Carolina, as well as in criminal justice. She has had a number of Capitol Hill internships with a current presidential candidate, so I will let you guess on who that is, but also a series of bipartisan internships with the former Speaker of the House, experience working with the South Carolina State Ethics Committee, and prior to AAHOA, she worked full-time at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. So we are so pleased that Emily actually just joined us recently. But before I turn the mic over to Emily, I'm going to cover a few items. As shown on the next slide, AAHOA, we find great joy and take great honor in hosting twice a year large lobbying fly-in days. And so we recently hosted one this spring, the AAHOA Spring National Advocacy Conference. And we had more than 200 members fly in, and we had in-person meetings with more than 150 members of Congress, including in-person meetings with 30 US senators. And so we really promote meeting in person with our members of Congress. And to the next slide, during the first quarter, the officers and I also made several trips to Washington, D.C. to meet with members of Congress so that they know who AAHOA is, know what our key issues are, and can address those. So I will now turn this over to Emily to give an overview of some of the key items that we are advocating for in DC at the current time. So Emily.
Thank you, Laura Lee. Hi, everyone. My name is Emily Martin, and I do work at the Washington, D.C. office for AAHOA as the policy director. So what I am focused on right now, you'll see on the screen, and right now we are more than aware about how the pandemic really rocked our industry. So now we are working on how can we build it back, but also make it better and more resilient to future events or laws, and how can we adjust what we're doing now to build that basis up. So as you'll see under the first bullet, we are working to expand access to capital by increasing SBA loan limit increases. So this access to capital is vital, it is critical, it is necessary for small businesses to operate and thrive, and especially today's economy. So in 2010, the Small Business Administration, the SBA, they capped the 7A and 504 loans, which are the loans available, at $5 million. And we need assistance from Congress to increase these loans to match the current economic conditions. As for an example, the US dollar, we know, depreciates, and in the past 13 years, it has lost 28% of its value. And so we really need these loans to reflect the difference in value as well as the economic conditions that we are going through. Several hoteliers also use these loans to finance the new construction or purchase of their hotel properties. And hotel values are significantly higher than current loan limits. So there is substantial collateral for higher loan limits. While we are pushing for this, we have been talking to those members on small business committees, and we are currently in a standstill as right now they have bipartisan focus on the fintech industry. So at the moment, they are pushing for that, but I think it's vital to emphasize that we are staying on top of them and constantly reminding them about why we need this, and so we don't lose the traction that we have already made. So then if you look at the second bullet, make permanent the earned income tax credit expansions to help bring needed workers back into the labor force. I think we all know there is severe and critical labor shortage for business owners. This tax credit affects workers without children, but it expired at the end of 2021. We are pushing for this tax credit to become permanent. The American Rescue Plan passed in 2021, and it tripled the maximum credit amount of eligible workers who weren't raising children. It also lowered the eligibility age from 25 to 19, which was essential, as without that lowering of age, we were locking out young adult workers to benefit from the credit. It also limited the maximum eligibility age, so reflecting the fact that these workers are continuing to be employed longer in life. We need to match the current economic conditions again. And so by making these changes permanent, it will encourage these needed workers to re-enter the labor force and to address the shortage affecting our business owners. And this leads perfectly into that third bullet by addressing the shortage to increase the number of visas. And so the hospitality's unemployment rate is at 6% as of earlier this year. And for a shocking number, that is 76.47% higher than the overall US unemployment rate, which clocks in around 3.4. So the Biden administration announced its expansion of an additional 64,000 temporary non-agricultural worker H-2B visas for fiscal year 2023. This is in addition to the 66,000 H-2B visas that are normally available each year, which is a great start. We applaud that. However, this is essentially very far from the estimated 1.5 million open jobs in our industry alone. So what are we seeking Congress to do? We are looking to eliminate the caps on these H-2B visa programs altogether. Therefore, there are no constraints on addressing employers' needs for additional seasonal workers. And we are pushing for, if an already approved worker is brought back into the employment, they should not be accounted against the cap of a new visa. So we are also pushing to allow these visas to be valid for multiple years as opposed to just 1 year, therefore eliminating the need for businesses to undergo the cumbersome filing processes each year. So we are looking to ease our businesses owners while addressing the labor shortage. And then the final bullet is kind of how we make this happen, right? So there's no lie. Government is run on relationships. Washington especially is run on relationships. Vital to target relationship building with these members of Congress, but it is more vital to target our relationship building with the members who have influence where we need help. So I encourage anyone who is starting out in this industry, who is looking to jump forward with it, really focus on the committees and caucuses that address your needs. and we can start with the members there. And I also advocate for starting with junior members, as they have more bandwidth and opportunity to engage with their constituents, therefore increasing access to these members and their staffers to really get your point across, and let them help you advocate to these other members. And I will advocate to the end that staff meetings are important. These congressional staffers are your lifeline to the actual member. But we also really are emphasizing the effect that these members' constituents have on their districts. So as Laura Lee presented earlier in the presentation, you saw a few statistics. So earlier we commissioned, I think a few years ago, and we are in the process of commissioning a new one, an Oxford study showcasing the economic impact of our association. And shocking here, members of Congress, they love data. They love seeing effects of their constituents and how they are contributing to the overall success of the United States. They want to advocate for you, and they want to be your biggest cheerleader. So by giving them these numbers, we show them what effect we have on the local economy as well as the overall economy for the United States. And one specific way that we are showcasing the effect of our constituents on the economy and on their districts is that we are implementing essentially called back of the house tours. So what we get is these congressional members to come to our members' properties. They check in guests, they can fold towels, they can engage with the hotel guests. It's really up to our AAHOA member to lead the way. And this one allows for a relationship between their member of Congress and the constituent, but it also gives vital insight into how our hotels are run while offering the relationship building exercise. And just one point on this is when we have a member of Congress come to our property, that gives one-on-one time to, first of all, develop trust, but second of all, advocate for what you need as their constituent. And welcome to take any questions. I know that was a lot, but thank you for bearing with me.
Thank you, Emily. Excellent overview. And I can just tell, I'll share with the group that Emily has spent a lot of time organizing the back of the house tours at our members' hotels. And it's just created just such a wonderful opportunity for our members to really get to know their local members of Congress. And so we're excited to see where this is going. And of course, the social media posts and the news coverage as well is great of here these very distinguished members of Congress folding towels and making beds at the local hotels. You know, it's just a great snapshot of how, you know, they are representing their constituents and they care. So let's move to the next slide, and we'll just touch briefly on a few other things that we're tracking at the federal level. I bring this up because some of you may have heard in President Biden's State of the Union address, he had mentioned junk feeds. And so this is really targeted more towards full service hotels and large resorts, and the concept that sometimes guests are surprised if fees are added to their bill that they were not expecting. So the FTC is taking a look at that to determine first, you know, when and how they should be disclosed, and second, if they're excessive fees. So we are involved with that. One other item that I'll mention coming from the FTC is that we are welcoming is the FTC is really re-looking at the relationship between franchisors and franchisees. More than 85% of AAHOA's 20,000 members are franchisees, meaning they sign these long-term 20-year franchise agreements with the big hotel, the big franchisor conglomerates. And sometimes the balance, sometimes it's out of balance. And what I mean by that are the big franchisors. They have teams of attorneys to write these franchise agreements. And then, you know, our members, as a small business owner, comes in, signs it, and they're on the hook for 20 years, and sometimes practices can get out of balance and possibly be unfair. So the FTC is looking closely at full disclosure, fairness, anti-competitive issues. They've asked for a request for information where they posed a series of more than 20 questions to franchisees across all industries, and they're seeking public comment. So if anyone's interested in that, the deadline for submitting a response to these questions is coming up on June 8th. We are working with some outside law firms to put some of this data together that we've collected from our members, and we'll be taking a role in that. We recently also hosted an FTC webinar call with the chair, Lena Khan, and we had leaders from AAHOA, from another organization known as CFA, the Coalition of Franchisee Associations, as well as AAFD, the American Association of Franchisees and Developers. And all the leaders identified concerns that they have with the franchise practices, the long-term relationships with the franchisors. And it was a very well-attended and highly regarded call that we were able to host with the FTC. So we are very active in that area as well, because it's so important to our members at this point. So let's now move to the next level, and that is looking at state and local updates. And I would like to officially introduce Rachel Stone. You already heard from Rachel for a few minutes, but Rachel is our brand new Director of State Government Affairs for the Western region. And Rachel, as you can see from the slide, went to Toka Falls College with a degree in history education. She was cum laude. She also went to Emory Law School with honors, top 25% of her class. She then attended the University of Georgia for leadership, administration, and policy. She has a lot of experience with education policy and teaching at Gwinnett County Public Schools, 5 years at the local and district levels. But then on kind of the government and advocacy side, she worked with Nathan Deal and first year of Brian Kemp's administration for 2 years in child advocacy, including human trafficking and criminal justice reform. So we are so pleased to have Rachel on our team. But going to the next slide, before we kind of give you an overview of the key issues that we're really monitoring in the states, we have another question for you. Why do you think people stay in Airbnbs when they're traveling? Do you think it's because it's easy to book? Is it location, or is it a unique experience? Any thoughts on why you think people would stay in an Airbnb instead of a hotel when they're traveling?
But right now, unique experience is winning.
Okay.
Not sure if that's shocking to y'all, but unique experience and then location.
Okay, excellent. Thank you, yes, for jumping in on that. So, so going to the next slide, I'll do a quick overview kind of what we're looking at the state level. This is more kind of generalized, but one is the short-term rentals, and that is the Airbnbs. And why this has become such a big deal in so many states is for our members, especially, if it's a family and they are going to rent out their home for a week or a weekend, that is not a concern by any stretch. But what we've seen happening is large corporations are coming in and buying up the affordable housing in many cities and offering them as short-term rentals for anywhere from one night to, a month or longer. And so without proper oversight, it really has created not only kind of unfairness for the hotel industry, but it has also impacted affordable housing in a lot of cities, as well as raised human trafficking concerns, because a lot then of these homes are not licensed, they're not registered, they're not paying taxes, they are not even complying with basic safety requirements. For example, if there's a pool in the backyard, they might not have any life safety rings, or there might not be any, fire extinguishers in the kitchen. So it's raised concerns across the board. And there's really an effort right now for states to pass legislation that would allow cities and counties to kind of pass their own ordinances that monitor these short-term rentals, require them to be registered, require them to pay their taxes, require them to comply with the basic safety requirements, as well as no noise ordinances, trash pickup issues, there you can imagine all the things that could arise if these homes are being rented out and nobody's really monitoring it. So that is, the short-term rentals is a big deal for us. Another one is online travel agencies. We're also monitoring, what's happening with these online travel agencies. And at this point, there's really a duopoly between Booking.com and Expedia. And so those two companies own almost all of the other online travel agencies. So in other words, when you go to book a hotel room, unless you're going directly to the hotel or the brand, you're probably doing it through one of these online travel agencies. There's a number of fees and other things that are happening. And because there's really a duopoly right now, they are able to set very high rates. And so we're monitoring that and kind of working with different government agencies on what should happen there and what should be addressed. Another key issue that's really coming up across the country, especially coming out of COVID, is there are guests that are staying in our members' hotels, and they maybe pay for the first few nights or the first week or two, but then they stop paying. And so as a hotel owner, what do you do? And typically our members will call the local police department and say, I have a guest who's no longer paying. Well, this is where it gets tricky, because sometimes the police department will come over and they will cite them for trespass and order them to leave the hotel room. But sometimes the police are coming to the hotel, and we've heard stories of this. They look at the hotel room and they say, oh, it looks like this person has been living here for a while. You're going to have to go through the whole court eviction process. We even had one member that experienced that. The police would not do anything. They went through the whole eviction process to have a guest removed from their hotel, got in front of the judge with their attorney, and the judge said, why are you here? You're a hotel, not an apartment complex. What are you doing here? So it really has put our members in a bind on guests that are overstaying without paying and how best to address this. So we're working with different states to get laws that for transient guests, that if they are overstaying, that it's a trespass and they are not considered to be tenants under the landlord-tenant law. And then finally, human trafficking has become a big concern in the hotel industry. And I'll share with you that it's interesting that the vast majority of the human trafficking incidents actually come out of truck stops and out of adult entertainment centers. But hotels, because they are owned by small business owners, have become a target for very ambitious or aggressive plaintiffs' attorneys who want to sue them for allowing human trafficking violations to occur in the hotel. So we are really on a campaign to educate our members and to really make sure that they're protecting their guests at the hotel, and to identify anything that they see that might be an issue and be able to report that. And I'll have you flip to the next page, because as going through this process, I heard a story that I thought was fascinating, that apparently there's a universal hand signal for help if you're a human trafficking victim. And one is you put your hand up, you tuck your thumb in, then you trap your hand and then you lift it up. And then you repeat that. And the reason this is so valuable is because, for example, at the hotels, and you've probably seen this at different places, sometimes in airports, but there is a phone number for human trafficking victims to call. But if you're a victim and you're with the person who's victimizing you, you probably do not have a phone and you probably do not have any privacy to make a call. So this is one way that, if you can stand behind the person who is doing this to you, can stand behind the person and, give these hand signals maybe to the front desk clerk who's checking you in, or to other guests. It might be a way to save some of these victims. I read one story about a victim who was in the backseat of a car, and she was using these hand signals out the back window, and a car drove by and they recognized it and they called the police and with the license plate number, and this victim was rescued. So kind of the question for you is, will you share the secret hand signal with family and friends to really, get this widespread and help recognize victims who might need assistance? We're really trying to get this information out to make sure that we're covering this in the industry and beyond. So.
Yes, I just launched the polls for a summary of that, asking if people were aware that there was a hand signal and would they use it. And it looks like almost 90% were aware, and 100% said yes, they will share it with people.
Excellent, excellent, very good. Well, thank you for that. So with that, I am now going to turn to the next slide and have Rachel cover things that are moving in some specific states that we had alluded to. So Rachel.
Yes, thank you, Laura Lee. So as she mentioned, my name is Rachel Stone. I am the Director of Government Affairs for the Western region here at AAHOA. And while we're on the topic of human trafficking, Florida just passed a human trafficking bill. So what it does is it decreased the compliance window. So in the event that a hotel is found to not or to be incompliant, whether it's the training of their employees. So in most states require or either encourage hotels to train their staff on how to identify signs of human trafficking. And I would argue, if I'm looking at the data correctly, all states require at least a human trafficking hotline posting at a hotel property. If you read the statute, it gets very specific, even down to the measurements, where it's supposed to be placed. So going back to the bill that Florida just passed, so if a hotel is found to not have trained employees or to be in compliant with the postings, before this bill, this hotel had 90 days to then become compliant. So they would have 90 days to train their employees or 90 days to go in and add a posting. So Florida just passed a bill that decreased that 90-day compliance window to 45 days. And that bill went to the governor on May 2nd of this year, and it will go into effect July 1st of this year. And then for the sake of time, because it is 2:50, if I could categorize the legislation that is going on in both the East and the Western states, I would use labor. So we mentioned the Los Angeles wage ordinance, where they're looking to raise the minimum wage from $18.86 an hour to $25 an hour in the year, I believe, like immediately, and then with the intent that they would raise the minimum wage even more so that by the year 2028, it will be $30 an hour for tourism workers. So this doesn't just impact the hotel industry, it will also impact the airline industry. In Oklahoma, I'm just gonna go to the west a little bit. Oklahoma, they just passed in the city of Norman, Oklahoma, they just increased the current room tax from 5% to 8%. And this was an ordinance that a lot of the people of Norman, Oklahoma, they surprisingly, when I spoke to people with boots on the ground, they were all for it because it supported this new youth center. And so this new youth center will bring in a lot of business. Also in Oklahoma, evictions. So this bill was actually signed into law on May 2nd, 2023. So a pretty short summary of this bill. So after a lodging establishment guest is ejected, so as Laura Lee mentioned earlier about these evictions, so after a hotel ejects a guest, they are considered a trespasser now in the state of Oklahoma, and no longer a guest. And so the hotel can remove the guests with the support of police for trespassing. So they don't need to go in and go through the court system like before. And then I would also categorize some of the bills that we're tracking in the tax and use. So to continue with that, for example, in Louisiana, there is a ordinance right now that would authorize Denham Springs to ask voters to raise an occupancy tax from 6.5% to help fund fire and police department salaries. So a lot of times city ordinances will come in and try to raise the tax of hotels. So that hotel per night stay, they'll try to raise that tax to fund some other initiative. We're seeing some very similar things in Los Angeles where there is talks of raising a hotel tax to fund the hospital budget. So, a lot of coalitions, it's why are we getting picked on? Why is the hotels, the blame? Like, why do we? And I would say, for the sake of time, that is all that I have for. There's plenty other legislation that we are tracking and closely tracking, but for the most part, our interests are human trafficking, the tax. There are a few tort reform bills. So regarding ADA violations, so this Americans with Disabilities Act. So in the event that a person is injured on a hotel property, in Florida, they just passed a bill that would pretty much hold both parties accountable in these personal injuries, reasonably accountable in these personal injury cases. So we look at tort reform, evictions, human trafficking, fair franchising, and labor.
Well, thank you so much, Rachel. And as you might all imagine, with 20,000 members owning more than 34,000 hotels across the United States, there's a lot of issues that arise, and they typically will pick up the phone and call one of us to get help and get answers. So it keeps us very busy as we continue to work with them and have our voice heard on these levels. But would welcome any questions. And Barbara or Brittany, do you have questions that you've seen that have been already submitted?
Barb, do you see anything? I have my screen.
Right, yeah. At this time, you had mentioned gathering data that there was still a survey open through, I think it was June.
Correct.
Is there a website that we could that they could participate in?
Yeah, so if you go to the FTC website and you can look up the request for information, and we could provide you a link too if you would like to provide it to the attendees, but it's a request for information and it involves franchise practices. So it relates to the franchise rule. So I believe I Googled it, and that's and it's fairly easy to pull it up.
I'll pull it out. Okay. And I guess just in the future, what is it that you guys see that will be on your radar to watch, especially as we go through the debt ceiling discussions and more.
Yes, so well, and that's always one of the, questions in the industry, what does the economy look like and what is the future? Is there a recession, hitting the industry? And so interestingly enough, our AAHOA members tend to be very bullish on the economy. They continue to move forward. I think they've been through enough kind of downturns and upturns that they continue to build their hotels, continue to move forward. So the struggle is really in large part right now, kind of the things that we had discussed, the access to capital, that is always a struggle. And then the other is the extreme labor shortage. And so with the labor shortage, it's been interesting too. I mean, every time there's kind of a problem, solutions start coming to the forefront. But as a result of this extreme labor shortage, we've seen a lot of technology being used to address some of these things. Everything, and I'm enjoying it, everything from you take your phone, right, and you can check into hotels and you can get your key access to, I was at one hotel recently where there was a kiosk, and you go up to the kiosk and you enter your name, and here it is a person on the other side. It's almost like a Zoom call, right? And you say, I'm checking in. And I had to ask the person, I said, now, by the way, which country are you from? And he laughed and he said, well, I'm really not supposed to share that. But he said, I'm from India. So, and, it worked out very well. I could ask questions. I didn't need it, but I could have even gotten change from him. So it was almost like having, a real person in the room who was able to assist with, extra towels and getting keys and getting everything addressed. So it's interesting to see that develop. And we just, as I mentioned, had our AAHOA, and there were different vendors there that had robots. You can get a robot who will deliver the room service. There are robots that will vacuum the room. I think the one struggle in the industry is they have still not figured out how to design a robot who can make beds. So that has been kind of probably everything else in the hotel room can be cleaned, including maybe a bathroom. Maybe it would almost be like a self-cleaning bathroom, or like similar to a self-cleaning oven, or some sort of robotic device that could spray it down and sanitize it. But right now, they do not yet have the robot to make the beds. So that is something I believe Ohio State University, I heard, was focusing on this in their robotics program. So, so we're looking at every level as far as how we can address this. So,
well, excellent. I think we're up against the hour now, so we'll probably hold the questions. And
well, thank you again, Laura Lee and Rachel and Emily, for jumping on this call today. It was a pleasure. If you are collecting continuing education credits today, please note that you need to self-report your credit for this webinar through the certification tracking spreadsheet. This spreadsheet is available at the bottom of the HFTP virtual education webpage. In addition, an email with your CPE credit certification information will be sent out within 24 hours. So please save that email for your records. And with that, it concludes today's broadcast. And thank you again to our speakers, and thank you to the audience for showing up today. We appreciate it.
yes, thank you. Quite an honor. Thank you.